1 minute. If you could please just limit your question to one question, then we'll move on so everybody has an opportunity to dialogue. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
When the planes were shut down in international waters, you have proof that they were. What was the international reaction to the shooting? I mean, they just said, "Oh well." What did other countries say besides the United States and besides the Vatican said something about the top level? What was the reaction?
I would say lip service. As a matter of fact, the government of Cuba managed to cover up very much what they did, and the initial reaction was mixed. There's people that want to believe whatever they're told from Cuba, and they simply. I was in Italy during the time of Alliance for a short period of time, and talking to some intelligent people. They own a bookstore there. I mentioned, did you hear something what happened with the airplanes of Brothers to the Rescue? Well, we heard that something happened that, some planes were down. Well, but then we found out that it wasn't true. So...
Well, at least they heard something in Italy. They don't hear anything in France.
Right.
Nothing. Still.
Right. And it was covered up. It was very well covered up. And there was an interest from the government of Cuba to cover it up, and there was an interest from the government of the United States to cover up, because it was very embarrassing what happened that day there. That day they had the capability, they know-how, they knew what was going, they knew what was going to happen to us, and they let it happen. That very morning at noontime, there were airplanes coming from Cuba, believing that we were coming at that time, and the U.S. interceptors went out, and the MiGs from Cuba went back to the island on responding to a standard operating procedure that the Air Force had for the defense of South Florida. That afternoon, 3 hours later, when we were there, when the MiGs were attacking us, and the procedure was going to be in place, again, the pilots were told to step down of stand down by the station. In other words, to step down of the airplanes. They were ready to go, and they were very eager to go. And I know the military because I've been in the military myself, and I have a great deal of respect for the armed forces of this country. And this group of members of the Air Force were quite frustrated with the fact that we were abandoned by our own government here in the United States. That order to stand down by our station would only have come from one place, the White House.
Sanchez, when you mentioned what would happen if we let our end of the rope go? What exactly you mean?
If we have done something for 50 years and that hasn't worked, logic tells me that we should reconsider it, that we should revisit it. The United States put into effect an embargo that was not to free the Cuban people. It was to retaliate against the corporation, the nationalizations of the U.S. corporations in Cuba. Somehow throughout the years, decades now, that has been modified a bit to give us the notion that that is to free us. But at the end of the day, Fidel Castro needs to be placed in exactly in the position he is now. He needs to have an outside enemy, powerful one, especially one that would not cause his downfall, one that he can blame for everything that happens inside. So he doesn't have to give any account to the Cuban people. He can maintain a position that Cuba is being is about to be invaded by this powerful force, and he can present himself to the rest of the world as a victim rather than as an aggressor. He can convince also some people that if that aggressor comes in, he will take away whatever you don't have really, but whatever you have, including your country, because in our history, we had invasions and we had situations of interfering with our internal affairs. He has been able to convey that. But it's not only the embargo. It's every time a policy is put into effect, unfortunately, the victim is not the government, it's the people. A while back, a set of sanctions was put into effect that none of them are aimed at the regime. The only one, TV Martini, the plane has never flown. It has a it has a flat steering wheel. Can never fly. It has never flown. I mean, it has flown, but not. They just test flights, couple just before election time only. We're gonna get it again in a while when we see election time here for the state of Florida. But there is not a serious attempt on the side of U.S. policymakers to understand what the people of Cuba want and need. Because the first thing you have to do is dialogue with the people who you are trying to help to see what they want, see what they need. And you have to dialogue with all sectors. You can't just say, I'm going to go with the extreme right wing or the extreme left wing or the center. Can't do that. We live in a world that is very interrelated. In globalization, of course, it's a factor here. But nations, people, deserve respect. We have been the victims of the criticism and negativity of other countries towards the United States. We have taken that on our shoulders as well because of these policies that the rest of the world associate us with. When in reality, most of the people don't believe they work. And I'm totally against giving Castro money. I'm totally against giving him a chance to survive. So I'm not advocating at all, as some people say, to provide Castro resources or anything like that. There are ways, legal ways, in which we can dismount the industry that he has here with the trips to Cuba and all that, if we were courageous enough to introduce changes that force those transactions to take place in a dynamic of market values instead of a controlled monopoly that we have right now. If we legally go against that industry based on the fact that it's a monopoly and that it fixes prices, we can reduce that. But in order for us to do that, we have to take away the restrictions that impede other those transactions to have a market dynamic. In other words, if you have AT&T only making the calls, as a source for the calls to Cuba, of course they're going to put, they're going to force put the price up there with the Cuban government as well. If you have only one company traveling to Cuba, same thing. Only Western Union, same thing. Those are things that we can do. But we also need to allow people to exercise rights that are internationally recognized. For example, or let me say this, to me freedom is the accumulation of all rights. All rights, I'm free. You take away one, you're taking away a little bit of my freedom. Take away another one, less freedom. And the contrary is true. As I gain rights, as I validate rights, I am attaining freedom. As I overcome barriers, if I can travel to see my family and my family can travel to see me, I'm expanding freedom. I don't have an army to invade, and I don't have president there that wants to change things. So what is next? That dynamic. And this is why I said the rope that we're pulling, if we turn it loose, which means if we change some of those policies and we try the other approach. Like Palestra said, you have been tightening the screw constantly. Why don't you try the other way around?
And that,
Other than presenting a very large voting power, hold on, for in terms of elections, we get a lot of attention every 4 years in South Florida. But what else can the Cuban exile community do to attract the attention of foreign policymakers in Washington D.C.? I mean, we're not number one in their priority right now, and they have a lot of stuff going on. And what else can be done?
Election time.
We have to wait for them.
Election time. In the second term of George W. Bush, before the elections took place, we brought about the attention of our community here that this administration had not done nothing for us meaningful in regards to bringing about a change in Cuba. It had ignored us, even though it attained power thanks to the Cuban vote, that we were very loyal to the Republican Party and so on. So we decided to take one move that I think brought to the attention the fact that this was taking place. We gave a press conference and said that we were having our participation in the Republican Party. I had been a 30-year Republican Party member. I took my card and in front of the cameras, I signed it and said, I am becoming a non-affiliated member of any party here until I see action towards Cuba, action which is meaningful, and the Republicans, as the Democrats, haven't done so. So I am a free agent right now. Here is my here is my card, and I put it into an envelope and put it into the mailbox there, and that's how we face the president. I got accused here by a great deal of the community of saying that I was playing for the Democrats, that I was what kind of a Republican was I, that how come there was no way to deal with the situation, that how come I dared to talk to the president that way, and so on. I mean, it's kind of an attitude of servilism, servitude, that is very unbecoming to the condition of being a free human being. We did not have the courage to tell the president, sir, you are not serving our purposes. Sir, you are an instrument, not an end. And as instrument that you are to be, if you don't serve my purposes, you are not in my ballot. In other words, dealing with politicians as you deal with consumer products. Consumer products do not serve your purpose, you go to the next or take another one. If you go to Winn-Dixie, there are 5 different guayabas. And you choose the one you want, all right? And if you say, no, I'm only going to have Conchita, well, you're going to see that the other guayabas fade out, and eventually Conchita is going to give you bullshit. So that's one of the ways of dealing with the politicians. Unfortunately, we have that opportunity every 4 years, and we don't know how to use it.
Yeah. May I say something about that? Of course, those are tactics that you can employ, but there is a more, I think, a more global approach to this, which is when we act as people united that have a common goal of freedom, and that is presented not as a political quest, but rather as a human tragedy that we want to change. I think when we do that, we become such a powerful message to everybody and inspires people, and people see it as see us not as aggressors, but as something romantic and beautiful and something that they want to be associated with. When that happens, when we're able to do that, I think we will be able to get those people to respect us more. And when we don't say yes to everything, when we dare to look at them in the face and say, sir, I'm sorry, I'm very grateful for that, but you must respect us. We must depart from a perspective of mutual respect if we want to get anywhere.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Something that I wanted to say, I agree that we need to be united and that we need to come together as a community to, to help serve ourselves here and the community over there. And we have to face the fact that, the truth is, this is our problem. And that if we're going to need change, we're going to have to face it. I'm studying journalism, so truth is basically, on the top of my agenda, like, all the time. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid how good the news is or how bad the news is. What it is there. And we have to face the problem. Now, we have to also know that, we're not, getting as much support as we would like. But again, this is our problem. This is something that we need to fix ourselves. But we shall not also, try to push away the U.S. government, because the U.S. government would be like el gigante ayudando el chiquitico en la mata, subir la mata. Because the thing is that here, it's like if you don't help yourself, they won't help you. That's how it's been for the last 400 years of this continent. I thank God every day that I live in a free country. Something that my brother, my mom, and my dad didn't experience until 1984 when they came here. My brother served in the Marine Corps. That's how appreciated he was in this country. My dad is laboring for 22 years in this country every day. I know and appreciate what freedom is, but we also need, to have dialogue with Washington when we ever have that chance.
Of course. I don't think anybody has said that we don't have dialogue. In fact, we have had many good experiences with that. When we have dialogue from a position of mutual respect and we have demanded that respect. There is a law. There is a presidential proclamation. Maybe most of you don't know, but I'm going to give you the numbers so that you can research it. Presidential Proclamation 6867. It's a proclamation made by the President of the United States against the democracy movement and Grocery Rescue. Has only been enforced against our movement. 3 permits only have, over 3,000 permits have been granted under this proclamation, and only 3 denied ours. Only 3 vessels have been confiscated under that proclamation, ours. 3 people have been charged under the proclamation, us. It's a proclamation that says if you depart from U.S. soil with the intent to enter Cuban waters, whether you enter or not, doesn't matter. You can go to jail for 10 years and your vessel taken away from you, and $250,000 fine. You know why they did that? Because when we began to do those flotillas, they were becoming too popular inside and outside Cuba. People inside Cuba were mobilized and coming to the Malecón to throw flowers and flash mirrors to us. It was becoming very romantic outside too. And they needed to stop that because it was our own thing, it was not theirs. They didn't control it. So, because they couldn't control it, they came up with Proclamation 6867. An aberration of the law, because when we go with those vessels towards Cuba, and the Coast Guard surrounds our vessels so that it's not to protect us, it's so that we don't go into Cuban waters. And in fact, when we have gone, and we have done it exercising our rights. When we do that, we have done that, we have seen Americans' vessels go by us and go into Hemingway Marina, and no Coast Guard vessel departs from our side there to go and ask them, where are you going? So, dialogue is important. But if they cannot control you, they'll do anything, including that, to control you, to incarcerate you, or even to discredit you, which is what they're doing with the monies that they're now saying that exist. It is a means to discredit the genuine opposition that inside of Cuba, and this is something we resent very much.
Well, couple of questions. One, you were talking about sanctions and also about travel restrictions. However, despite those sanctions that were tightened up a couple of years ago, from what I understand, the United States since 2001 is the top seller of agriculture and pharmaceutical goods to Cuba in the United States, and U.S. businessmen are traveling to Cuba and going to conferences in Cuba along with senators and congressmen to meet up with Fidel Castro. So I want to see what your reaction is to that. Secondly, how many, you touched on it as well, the issue of the yachts, because I know that a lot of American yachts go to the Hemingway Marina, they spend their weekends there, and how many of them have been prosecuted?
I have seen personally, I don't know how many of those boats go into the Hemingway Marina, from the air, departing ports here in the United States. One given occasion, we told the Treasury Department that we were willing to provide them with information of these boats going in, and the answer we got was, well, you know, you have to prove that they spend money in Cuba. So that tells you the attitude, and that tells you that all this is pure hypocrisy, that there is an understanding between the two parts, and that they're maintaining an equilibrium despite of the rhetoric that you hear of insults and so on. For what's really happening is that they have a working understanding on how to attain their mutual interests and continue in this open word struggle, if you may, that leads nowhere but keeps the exile community happy when they see it happening. But in fact, there's nothing there. As you said, commerce has increased. They are, in effect, providing, the United States is providing right now the opportunity for those things that are needed in Cuba to be supplied by commerce here in the United States, by people who are interested that this happens. The very same people that were pushing for an opening with Cuba, an opening of relations, prior to the shoot down of the Brothers to the Rescue. The Brothers to the Rescue shoot down was a huge mistake by the Cuban government, not because they shot us down, because the plan was not completed the way they had it prepared. They were supposed to shoot down 3 airplanes, and they only shot down 2. Had they shot down the 3rd aircraft, they had a man in Cuba who was going to present the truth of what had happened and the reason why we deserved to have been shot. Except that by having the 3rd aircraft survive, we had 4 witnesses of what had happened there, and the plan that Cuba had to present for justifying their actions could not fly. Simply fall on its own feet, on its own face. So they had to go on a United States had to go on plan to save the situation by enacting certain measures which were, in essence, they were cosmetic. They did not represent anything substantial that would have harmed Castro or his permanence in Cuba. Castro was never threatened by any of the things that have been done by the United States since that event took place. And we have for years been proposing things that they are supposed to be approved here in the United States to be enacted, yet they are being ignored. And I'm talking specifically, for one thing, radio and TV Marti, they are a joke. We were able to transmit television sounds and images into Cuba from our airplanes with a budget of $6,000. We just did that in order to prove the point that it was doable from an aircraft, and that's what the aircraft thing came about. Since up until that time, they were playing with that balloon that cannot possibly get an image into Cuba. And after that, we heard that they were going to do this, they were going to do that they were building an airplane specifically for that. And the fact is that opening a window to the world, to the Cuban people, is much too threatening to the Castro government, for the Castro government to agree with the United States government into that it could be done, or it would be permitted. The rules of the game do not permit that. And the U.S. government has negotiated with Castro certain things that are not going to be done, and Castro has things that they cannot do against the United States either. There is an understanding of parts here, and we are fools enough to believe that there is a struggle here, and there is it's an equilibrium with cooperation in which the government of Cuba manages to get what they want. What they want is to stay in power, and that doesn't take that much. And the United States provides them with what they need to solve their situation, so they remain in power. So we have not seen to this day anything that would be threatening to the equilibrium in Cuba provided by the government of the United States. And I'm saying one thing that I think the government of the United States owes us, which is the indictment of Fidel and Raul Castro for the murder of our pilots, which is more than documented. We have Castro admitting to
Dan Rather?
Dan Rather that he gave the order for the shoot down, and that shoot down could have never have taken place without Fidel Castro's order, much less Raul Castro, who is next in the chain of command and the apparent successor of Castro. And Castro needs to have the expectation that there exists a successor for him in Cuba so that stability continues. And we have been trying to get Raul Castro indicted. We even put an offer of $1 million reward for information leading to the indictment of Raul Castro in order to unbalance that government. But the government of the United States wouldn't indict Raul Castro either, because that is Fidel Castro's parachute. They know that if people that are supporting Castro at this time start believing that there is nothing after Castro, they would get very nervous themselves, and they may take action on their own, which is what the United States doesn't want. They don't want anything that may destabilize the government that exists in Cuba right now, whether it's under Fidel Castro or Raul, because the future is going to be a hell of a lot easier for them to control, dominate, and use Cuba, its resources, its people, and so on, if they have let the situation degrade to the point it has so far, and it will further degrade if, with all these measures that are thinking of taking right now, like putting money into creating an industry for fabricating the future politicians of Cuba and fabricating our future leaders, because that money is not going to go into Cuba, it's not going to go into the opposition in the island, it's going to be floating here in the exiled community. You see new organizations flourish, people with television programs, radio programs, access to funds and so on, and all that is artificial. And I saw that took place in 1961 when the Bay of Pigs thing failed. I was part of that. I saw how it came about. I saw the way that we were duped at the time by the government of the United States that told us that they would support our leaders, and then they started creating our own leaders. Our leaders were created by them. You are going to be leader, you are going to be leader, you're going to be leader, we're going to start giving money to your organization, money to your organization, money to your organization. And then we had here a kind of a junta that was the representatives of our people in Cuba, which by no means elected any of them, nor the exiled community did, but they were the chosen ones. And those chosen ones were willing to let themselves be used as representatives of the Cuban people for whatever the U.S. came about with, and they came about with something called Bay of Pigs.
Next question? Yes.
I was wondering if you could clarify something for me. If I understand correctly, your position is that because embargoes and sanctions have not worked, that perhaps we could deregulate the travel business by lifting those embargoes and those sanctions, and stop supporting the Cuban economy this way. I have a couple of questions. First of all, am I understanding you correctly?
Let me just clarify something. It is not only because it has not worked. There are other ethical considerations with the embargo that have to do with the sovereignty. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I am understanding you that one of your positions is we should lift the embargoes and reestablish relations with Cuba.
We should revisit all our policies towards Cuba. The United States should revisit all the policies and depart from one that is consulted with the Cuban people as a means of solidarity with the Cuban people like any other nation, and respectful of the sovereignty of the Cuban people.
Well, that kind of
Wait,
confused.
because something doesn't work, doesn't mean that the opposite will.
Oh, I understand. Well, look, what do they say, one of the definitions of insanity is to continue doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I understand that aspect of it. I think my question is this. I think that, first of all, you're saying that if not necessarily reestablishing relationships, but with the Castro government, but with the Cuban people, how would the United States bypass the Cuban government and establish a connection directly with the Cuban people? That's the first part. The second part is, do you feel that perhaps, maybe you could give me your views or your reaction to the view that one of the reasons perhaps that the embargoes and the sanctions haven't worked as intended, and I'm not saying that that your reasons are not valid, I'm just saying that there's been another view out there that perhaps we as a Cuban exile community have circumvented those sanctions and embargoes by in essence supporting and helping support the Cuban economy by sending aid to our family members on the island.
That's humanly unavoidable. If you have a family member in Cuba, you're going to want to help that family
But didn't you
member
just
no matter
mention
what.
before this?
If Castro benefits from it, that's unfortunate, but it's even worse that to punish Castro, you're going to punish your family first. That's the way I see it.
But you began to talk about a 3-year don't see your family thing. Did I understand right? Are you saying that if we could just sever our connection for 3 years, that we could essentially
That's
start
what's happening
our-
right now.
No, let me say this. Freedom is the sum of all rights.
Mhm.
It is a human right for you to be able to travel to your country and leave your country whenever you want. It is a human right for you to be able to see your family and reunite with them. So if we are trying to achieve freedom for our country, it doesn't make sense to take away that, especially when we have done that for 50 years and it hasn't worked. John Suarez said something which is the most logical thing in this world. They say that they're doing this to punish Castro economically, yet a Cuban cannot send a soap to another Cuban in the island who's not a direct relative, or even to a direct relative. You can't send the soap or the Band-Aid, but an American capitalist driving a very nice Cadillac can sell millions of dollars and to the Cuban regime, so that he in turn doesn't provide those foodstuffs that he buys to the Cuban people, but to the tourist industry and his people in the island. Does that make sense?
Well, you speak about double standards, and I understand that. I totally get that. I guess my essential question is, if we reestablish relations and lift the embargoes, you're not promoting, and again, I want to make sure I have this clear, you're not promoting a dialogue between the U.S. government and the Cuban government, because your position is they're already dialoguing. What you're saying is we need to establish a connection with the Cuban people, and I guess what I'm asking is how can
Yes, we can. Even in these deals that take place, if you want to deal with me, sir, you have to allow that X percentage of these foodstuff that I sell to you, I can sell to the Cuban people, for example, or to small industries, to the small enterprise, so that you can foment independent enterprise inside of Cuba. And we have that. We have the seed. We have the Paladares, which out of nothing, people begin making their own little coffee shop, and it begins progress in little restaurants and so forth in there. And the government becomes so concerned about people having a little bit of resources that it goes against that, every 2 or 3 years, and push them and put them in prison, take money away from them. There are certain things that if you sit down and analyze, you can use the instruments that you have now for the good of the Cuban people.
But realistically speaking, though, how can the United States government be, or the United States, let's speak for the people, not the government, okay? How can we be assured that even if we place these conditions on the aid and on the relations, that the conditions will be honored? And if they're not honored, how can we?
I deliver to you, you just purchased 3 ships. I deliver to you the first one. And for the second 2 of them, one of those has to go to the independent sector, to the private sector, and the other I sell to you. And if you don't want it like that, I just don't sell to you. I haven't done that for X amount of years before. I hadn't done it. But this is just a minor thing. But the important thing is the rights of the people to communicate and people-to-people contact. What awoke the conscience of the Cuban youth in the island was a visit from the community here to there. The exchanges, that's what made them aware that what freedom is, because they had been raised under that dictatorship.
Information in Cuba is directed to the people directly by the government.
Mhm.
The government has a monopoly of information. That's why TV Marti doesn't work, because the U.S. government would be breaking that monopoly, and that is being an unacceptable item in the relation of the 2 countries. That's where the understanding comes in. And then the threat from the other side to send an invasion of refugees, to do this, to do that, and so on, and God knows what other threats the government of Cuba has in reserve, and God knows what other things they offer, like for instance, offering something which Ramon condemned, and I applaud him for it, which is letting the government of the United States use Guantanamo as a jail for the terrorists in Iraq and so on, and permitting those prisons to take very liberal measures on how to handle people and so on. That shouldn't have been in Cuba. The treaty for Guantanamo was not meant for that.
And
Castro welcomed it. So Castro is in effect giving things to the United States which are of consideration in that relationship. So there are deals between the 2 countries, deals of a substantial nature.
It's funny to know that every time a flotilla went to Cuba, a high U.S. Coast Guard official was in Cuba with the Cuban Coast Guard, planning so that they would know what to do if there was a conflict with us. And they denied that for a long time until they admitted it to us after El País in Spain published a picture of the person and said, this is going on.
If there are no more questions.
I have a follow-up.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
what, 9 or 5.
Yeah,
I just want to ask one question in regards to this relationship, which is, if I understand correctly, when the shoot-down occurred in '96, didn't the Cuban intelligence service and the American intelligence service meet in New York to
Yes,
get...
sir. A week after. And the excuse given when it was the meeting, once the press found out about it, was that the U.S. wanted to provide the Cubans with what they knew about what they had done, as if the Cubans didn't know. Tell the Cubans what they had done. That was the official excuse given for the meeting. But in fact, what they did was to arrange for the virtual reality they were creating at that time to cover up for what both of them did that day, which was one of them come after us and shoot those boys and kill them, and the other ones to cross their arms and look the other way, while knowing that this was taking place. So they needed to cover up for that. So it was a damage control meeting which took place in New York the week after the shootout. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have to get going. They're available if you want to ask some questions or, whatever. But we have to get going. Thank you so much for participating in this event today. We hope to see you tomorrow. We will be having the meeting at the fountain at 12, I believe. At 12 to commemorate the victims of the July 13th massacre. It will be a moment of silence at 12 o'clock in the GC fountain area. Please feel free to pick up some materials on your way out and sign in for us, please, and we'll be sure to let you know of any other events that are coming up. Thank you so much for your participation.